Today we had a very exciting roundtable with Ron Bloom, the Senior Counselor to the U.S. President for Manufacturing Policy. This is our second event with Ron. We had an event earlier this month in Columbus, Ohio, with 20 leading Columbus manufacturing CEOs. Today we had 15 or 20 of the leading Silicon Valley CEOs and entrepreneurs in the manufacturing space. And it was a really great discussion. Not only was there candor from Ron, but there were some really great ideas around the table on what these companies can do to help revitalize the manufacturing sector, working with senior policymakers in Washington.
I'm hoping we can just talk, and I'll do this in any way you want around the room, or answer questions, or just have folks say things, but it is really very, very important to us to have a dialogue with business. Obviously, at the end of the day, employment in America is going to be created by the private sector. What I like to say is government at its best can kind of clear the woods and maybe lay some irrigation ditches, maybe plant a few seeds, but at the end of the day, business has to grow the crops. Business has to be responsible for this activity, and it's a private sector activity. And look, and that's what's best about America. We have a lot of competitors around the world who do it different than us, and they're formidable. And we need to be very conscious of that. And I spend a lot of time trying to understand and think about what China's doing, what Korea's doing, what Germany's doing, because it's important, because we live in a global economy. But we're not going to solve our problems by doing it the way they do it. We have to do it in what I would call a unique American idiom. And that is what has made us still today, I think, clearly the unrivaled economic leader. And if we're going to be the economic leader for our kids and our grandkids, which I think we all passionately want to be, we're going to do it in an American way.
One of the things we think about and certainly concerned about is that if you look at the renewable energy, specifically if you look at the PV, United States certainly leads the R&D. We certainly lead the space in many of the other energy technologies, for example, energy efficiency. Yet the job creation seems to be taking place elsewhere. So what do we need to do? Do we really need to think at a big idea level, thinking at the Marshall Plan, as our CEO calls, and looking at the components that are somewhat permanent, longer term, and that would further induce companies to make large investments in creating jobs, but more importantly, sustaining it going forward.
You know, we have suppliers in Milwaukee that are trying to compete with Chinese suppliers for our business. Right. And we're at a point where we're scaling our operations rapidly. There's a bunch of capital that needs to be invested. Those companies in Milwaukee are at a disadvantage because the Chinese companies can go to the China Development Bank, get very, very low cost capital, and it's an indiscriminate program. They go, they have a legitimate business need, they're going to get access to that capital. Two of our solar panel competitors just got $11.7 billion line of credit. It's not a 3-year process. It's a very rapid process when there's a clear business need. If we're in Europe, there's a very, very clear set of guidelines for economic incentives. A company our size, if we built a plant there, we would know we'd collect around 13% in incentives. If we were smaller, we get a different ratchet of incentives. Indiscriminate program, as long as the basic criteria are met, that funding is there. And so when you say we've created successfully a lot of companies in the United States, frankly, I've participated in a lot of those companies. We built those companies here, we manufacture in other places. Why? Because the capital is cheaper there, and manufacturing requires investing large amounts of capital. So if the model we want to follow as a nation is to develop technology that gets manufactured elsewhere, we're doing exactly the right thing. But if the model that we want to follow is driving manufacturing here, we're going to have to find some way to compete with China, Europe, and anybody else who, as a nation state, believes there's an economic value in having manufacturing and believes as a national priority.
Look, I think it is bracing to look at the investments that other countries are making. I think we have to be honest about that. And so I do think we need to try to think big. But part of it, honestly, is how do we summon the political will? I mean, the president has tried very hard, and I think has been quite outspoken on this issue. But again, that's not where politics are in America today. And so I think we do have to think about reframing this discussion. I think that business leaders got to help us with reframing this discussion. I worry about the sort of the space we're going to occupy in the world economy if we don't lead in these areas. But I think we got to be honest with each other. We have to reframe this discussion, because where it is now, you know, I am optimistic. I think we're going to get 48C passed, but honestly, we're going to get it passed because it's a jobs bill. We're not going to get it passed because we're saving the environment. We're going to get it passed because people want to go back to work and factories employ people.
But on the other hand, you know, how do we make sure that we keep the innovation in this country, and especially where what you're really looking at innovation, the way I define innovation is essentially invention to products and services. Right. The invention is there, the technology is there, but somehow you need to have creative partnerships in taking that to creating jobs.
Right. But that issue of how do you do a partnership between government and industry, and we don't have terrific models of how to do it. But there is, I mean, there's a bunch of thinking going on about it, and I'm trying to sort of bring together folks. My sort of theory of how to do it is to do it around a project. So I've thought about, you know, could we have a roundtable on storage? Because it's a key issue. There's a bunch of science going on in storage. The DOE is supporting a bunch of the science. RPE is supporting science. DARPA is supporting science. So there's a bunch of pieces here, there, and everywhere. And everyone agrees that storage matters. Whether it's large-scale storage, home storage, vehicle storage, everyone agrees if we could radically reduce the cost of storage, we change a whole bunch of equations. So bringing companies together and sort of asking what is the proper role of government. I do think the central reason why we will lose at manufacturing is because we keep inventing it here and making it there. And my fear is that isn't where it ends. My fear is we will then start inventing it there. Yes. What will happen is the gravity will pull the other direction. That once you lose any of the manufacturing, it never goes the other way. You can't use the R&D to pull it back. Once the manufacturing is gone, the manufacturing will suck at the R&D, not the reverse. And so I think this is exactly the right issue. And it's obviously true that in the last 10 years, there's a lot more invented here, made there than there used to be. And so that equation is a bad equation. And we need to try to fix it.
I thought it was an excellent discussion, really frank, really honest. I think people had a lot of passion and a lot of different viewpoints, and we were really trying to find connection points and commonalities where we could actually move towards solutions. And a lot of that centered around how to focus on manufacturing being built out in the United States and not simply having R&D being carried out here and manufacturing then going overseas and then R&D following overseas to where the manufacturing may be going, trying to avoid that trend and really focus on building out manufacturing in the United States for new industries and what companies at different scales and sizes need in order to do that. On the one hand, manufacturing tax credits like the 48C program are helpful to companies that have a lot of revenues and profits they can offset their taxes against. But when you're at the earlier stage in manufacturing and you're building out a factory, you have often hundreds of millions of dollars of net operating loss carry-forwards, so a tax credit isn't so useful as a way to grow the company. So one way to help that would be to do a 1603 style grant in lieu of tax credit, so those tax credits could be monetized in a capital efficient manner with a low transaction cost, which would allow taxpayer dollars to be well spent in creating green jobs and really driving the engine of growth. Just that slight tweaking would allow us to dramatically expand. I'm hoping that you might be considering that.
Well, we are looking at whether we should move 48C to a 1603 style, and it is under discussion. We are talking to a lot of folks about what the transaction costs are and the monetization.
It's very encouraging to see people coming out to Silicon Valley from Washington, first of all, to get a perspective from here in the field, if you will. Second, it's encouraging to see them really being thoughtful about what the appropriate role of government should be in stimulating, advancing, and reinvigorating the manufacturing sector. It was interesting to see we had, I think, 4 winners of various programs that the government has put forward over the last couple of years in the room here today. But I thought the exchange about the specifics of how those are structured was quite useful.
And I think people are talking and struggling with that question of kind of what do we want to be as a nation and what is our long-term competitive place. So I think to the extent you are passionate about this stuff, that we ought to try to make stuff here, and that matters to having a middle class, and it matters to being a great nation. I think saying it is helpful. And that's part of what I do sort of every day, is say it. And then the second thing is specific ideas, whether it is what is the friction loss on monetizing 48C, which sounds small but is big to you and is big to me because I care a lot about 48C, to ideas about how we could form partnerships with other companies or labs. It's a big, big government, and I know a tiny fraction of it. So I'd love to get your sort of specific ideas and inputs, because this is going to work as an interactive process, and that's why I come here and try to do these things, and every time I do these I learn something, and I got 2 or 3 interesting ideas out of today, and I really appreciate it. And I really thank you guys for hosting it, and thank you all for taking time out of your schedule. There you go.